The project scope of work and deliverables is the meat and potatoes of your proposal. I used to take longer to get to that. I'd have information up front in my proposal document about my company, our process, our milestones, and all that kind of stuff. But really, your project scope of work is the most important part of the proposal. So my recommendation is to just to get right into that. Don't, put information about, your history and your background. That stuff you can put into your proposal later on, and it's in this template, but we'll want to just jump right into the project scope of work and deliverables. Now, as I walk through this, like I said, I'm going to kind of tell you how I would present this to a potential customer in my proposal presentation, but also kind of give you some insights into why I structured things how I did. First and foremost, you're going to want to, basically tell them that these are the main milestones. So you're starting your project off with a planning phase. You start every project off with a thorough plan, because without being able to create a proper plan for your project, you could potentially have missed deadlines, or you won't necessarily know what kinds of deliverables and assets are due by the customer and by you at that time. You'll want to be able to get a very clear understanding of everybody's schedules within that first week of the project. And that's where your planning phase comes in. And this isn't something that we just, throw together. This is something that you spend a good deal of time on when you're in the planning phase. Now, everything in our scope of work is organized by the general milestone or part of the website project, and then we've got a brief description about that, and we go into specific deliverables. So deliverables in general are usually things that are kind of keyword terms or certain types of asset definitions that, are very common for you and I as web professionals to understand. Like, we know what's going to happen in project setup, for example. But now the customer doesn't maybe know what project setup stands for. So this is where you'll want to verbally say, we use Basecamp for all of our projects, and we'll get you set up in Basecamp, and we'll do a Basecamp training session with you as part of the project. Now, once we've set up Basecamp, we're going to create a timeline and milestone setup. Now, this timeline is something that we're going to stick to and we're going to all commit to. And you're going to commit to that timeline as a customer, and we're going to commit to that as the professional, and we're going to make sure that we hit that timeline and all the milestones necessary. So, I mentioned Basecamp here. Doesn't matter what project management software you use. The point is you got this deliverable item here that says project setup. And when you're sitting with your customer and you're actually going through this, you're going to say in your own words what that item is, so they fully understand what this deliverable is. This is an important part of the value delivery process. When I say you should present a proposal, I literally mean you need to explain what every single deliverable is, so that when they see this, they know what that means. Because the alternative is that you actually explain it in writing, and if you did that for every single one of these deliverables, you're going to end up with the 40-page proposal, and you don't want that. You want something that your client understands what these individual items are, and I'll get to it in a little bit, but you also want to use the deliverables to control limits on things that are potentially going to affect scope creep or potential pitfalls. So now, these design objective surveys. So you'll want to explain that we're going to send a survey over to your client's business, and they can fill out that survey from anybody on their team or their staff. So this is kind of an information collecting period of time. We're going to be collecting information about the business, collecting information about people's design objectives, and you're going to do that very, very early on so that everybody gets their say. Now, this is something that we did, which was what we call an ideal customer profile brief. So every website owner or business owner has a customer, and it's important for everybody on my team and for myself and for my business owner to really understand who their customer is. So we create a customer profile brief, very similar to what I taught you in the Web Design Sales Kit about you defining your ideal customer. You'll actually be creating a quick brief about your customer, your client's customer. So that's a deliverable as part of our planning process. We feel like we need to know who's going to be visiting the website. And so I explain at this time to my customer what an ideal customer profile brief is. Now, this is another thing that we did, which is called a conversion workflow. So when somebody comes to a website, we want them to take some kind of action. So we create a workflow or a storyboard that specifically walks through what pages are going to be on the website, what actions we want the person to take, and how we think that's going to drive to conversion. So we do that before we start designing anything. And so explaining what conversion is, although I've already done that at different areas in my sales process, it's important as a deliverable item to explain that to the customer when you're presenting your proposal to them. And that kind of feeds off of a sitemap as well. So your sitemap is your overall general site structure, and all of these elements kind of work together to start to create your planning documentation. So you can see as I've walked you through this, it's not just about me explaining why I put deliverables in a proposal, but it's important for you to actually go through each of the items in your proposal and explain those to your customer so that there's never a question. Because things like, conversion workflow or ideal customer profile brief, we might sit around and talk about this stuff all the time as web professionals, but the business owner probably doesn't really think about this all the time. They're focused on their product or their restaurant, or they're focused on what's going on in their world. So these are things that you want to explain to them item by item. The next piece for us is conversion content. Now, conversion content is something that you may or may not currently do in your web projects. But I find that clients creating their own content for things like the homepage, their services page, their products, their about page, these are things that I want to have a professional write, and I want them to write them in a way that drives to conversion. So we create a general sales letter for all of our clients. We basically go through a long form sales letter exercise, and that helps us create a sales value proposition in writing that we think is going to help drive to conversion. So again, we don't let our clients write their own content. There's certain content, like when somebody comes to the homepage, you don't want to put that in terms of the business. Like a homepage should speak in terms of the customer that just arrived at that homepage. What's the headline that's going to grab their attention and potentially drive them to the services pages or the product pages or the About Us page to then do something like opt-in or purchase. So again, we create a content download opt-in. You'll never find any project that we ever did where there's a general newsletter sign up. Everything was always about some kind of content-driven opt-in, creating a valuable piece of content in order to drive opt-ins. So this is a great example where I'm telling you how I operated my agency, but this is an area where your customer may or may not understand what this stuff is. So if you expect to charge money for, let's say, conversion content, and I can't remember what in this proposal template I'm charging for this, but let's say I want to charge $2,000 or $3,000 to create some conversion content for a customer. Well, if they don't understand what conversion content is, and you have this item in your proposal, and you're just trying to throw it in there to see what happens, they're not going to pay for it. They're not going to understand the value that is delivered in this section of the proposal. Then we also develop an autoresponder series, because a content opt-in that's not followed up with some kind of autoresponder series is a content opt-in that's totally wasted. We want to create multiple interactions with the prospective customer that's just opted in for our business owners opt-in. We want to create a series of automated interactions that potentially help to drive business to our client site. Now, I've talked about this a lot, and we also force additional content. So we do not allow our clients to write their own content, at least not the final version. So the additional content writing basically is going to be where we take a content inventory, and the client is going to write the baseline copy for up to, let's say, 20 pages. These are the additional supporting pages on their site. Maybe it's their initial blog posts, maybe it's individual product pages. Whatever it is, they're going to provide that initial content, and then we're going to have a professional writer come in and do 2 rounds of professional proofing. So this is our first instance where we really have this limit, where we're saying we're going to do 2 rounds of professional proofing. So these are the places where when you're planning out your proposal, you need to be really careful about how you put limits in the proposal. If you think there's an area that could potentially balloon out and become this huge part of the project, those are areas you need to put limits in the proposal in writing. Doing a content inventory, for instance, as long as I know I've got about 20 pages, then a content inventory is going to cost about the same, really no matter what kind of content they have. Now, if they've got 150 pages or 3,000 pages, that's going to change content inventory. So this is areas where I look to these individual variables in the proposal to make sure that we're keeping them on point for our budget. And anything that has any kind of revisions, or where somebody's delivering an asset to us and we have to potentially do some work on it, you want to limit that on the amount of rounds of revisions. And you'll see here we also separate out rounds of revisions for the actual content itself. But there's always something that happens once you load the content into the website, and the client actually sees it. Then we limit on how many rounds of on-site revisions we allow as well. So that's just something that came from experience, that once you load content onto a website and the client shows it to a few people, they're going to want to change it. So we want to put a limit there to say, look, I know you're going to want to change this content once it's in the site. You can obviously do that in the CMS at any time, but if you want to have us change the content, or if you want to change the content layout outside of the CMS, then we're going to limit you to 2 rounds. Now, what's interesting up to this point is my proposal and my project plan has been planning, content, additional content, and now you'll notice that we'll get into search engine optimization. So up until this point, I haven't mentioned anything about design or website, because in our project process, content is always the most important thing. If we don't know what content's going to be on the website, if we don't understand the products and we don't understand the business's value proposition, creating a web design is the cart before the horse. So these are areas that we focus on early on in the project. We get content assignments out of the way. We get a professional writer working on stuff so that we really understand what's happening with content on the website, because content can and should define things when it comes to design and site organization. And what we don't want to do is design something that we end up wanting to really change because our content or our purpose has changed. So now I get into search engine optimization. So as I've started to develop content, doing search engine optimization research early on is extraordinarily important. Now, if you've gotten to this place, you probably have done some research as part of your discovery for your project. So doing SEO research in discovery in the sales process is definitely very important. But this is when you're going to put, really the rubber to the pavement here, and you're going to start, cruising down their business. You're going to start creating a competitive benchmark of their top 3 competitors. You're going to start looking at keyword research to target the top 10 keyword opportunities. And the reason we do this pretty much right after we do all of our general content assignments, is because we want to make sure that we're creating content that supports the keywords that we're going to be going after. So we don't want to just create aimless content, and we don't want to come back at the end of the project and do SEO research after we've finished the entire website build and all of our content's loaded into the site. If we see top 10 opportunities and they aren't previously defined in our content inventory, then we need to modify our content inventory. So we want to be able to create our page titles, our meta descriptions, and essentially our overall sitemap. We want to create that very, very early on. It's important to have these targets so as you're developing content, you can work towards that. Now, the SEO portion of this is a perfect example of where we've included some things that probably look like Spanish to your prospective customer. So things like Google XML, robots.txt, those are types of things that we want to be able to explain to our prospective customer. Like, what is a robots.txt file? You want to say, look, here, this is something that we do just to make sure that your site is indexed correctly and the right pages are indexed and the wrong pages aren't indexed. What's going to happen whenever you submit a proposal to somebody is they're going to show that proposal to a trusted associate of theirs. And if you have things or you're missing things in your proposal that make you not seem like a professional, then that other trusted person is going to look at that information and they're going to provide a recommendation, or they're going to provide some feedback to your prospect. So some of these things are included because we want to make sure that we're calling out the right buzzwords, the right deliverables that if somebody looks at, they're going to basically be able to identify that you're including the right stuff in the proposal, and the customer is going to be getting a good value for their budget. So again, I include limits on things. So optimize up to 3 locations through Google Local, Bing, City Search. So this particular business that I had pulled this template from had multiple locations. So I wanted to be very clear that we're not going to go in and optimize Google Local listing pages for 15 businesses. And we want to also provide 1 round of review and revision per location. So, and this is a very repetitive thing for me, but I limit anything that has the opportunity to be revised must have a limit. And customers, the thing that will kill you, kind of the death by 1,000 cuts, is when you don't put in the idea of revision rounds and you don't bake that into your project process. And when clients just kind of drip you revisions around something, like let's say I do a Google Local listing page for my customer, and they send me a revision that they need to update their phone number. And then 3 days later, they send me a revision of they need to update their address. And then 3 days after that, they send me that their description is different. And then a week later, they send me 2 images that need to be swapped out. Well, instead of getting them to organize all that information for me in one sitting so I can sit down and do that work in an hour and then be done with it, they're basically making me log in and switch gears into their project every, taking up 15 minutes, maybe 6 or 7 or 8 times. So instead of taking an hour and getting it all done in one efficient way, they basically made me work on a particular item for 2 or 3 hours. So I'm very particular about revision rounds, defining that with people that, you're going to get me all the information, you're going to have one opportunity to provide me feedback on that, and then once that's done, we're going to move into out of scope territory. And some of the stuff that I'm telling you as the web pro is stuff that you need to have conversations with your client about, because this is like your opportunity to set all of the expectations on the table, to put every little nuance about how you want your project to go, the types of rules and limitations that you have. Like, this is the opportunity to get it on the table. And the more thorough you are, the more value you're building for how you operate as a professional. So don't be worried if this is like a 2-hour meeting that you go on with your customer. As we get into the design section, this is a very open-ended type of part of the project. And so what we want to do is make sure the customer understands there's constraints here. We're saying that we're going to design them a custom-based website, or in your case, you could be building from a template, or you could be building from some other framework, which you might want to call out here in the description. In this template, I'm saying I'm doing a custom website design based on branding and colors, and so we're going to define a little bit about what that means. So I specifically call out that we like to build websites with a combination of convention and creativity, but we want to make sure that users can find the content they need and inquire about your services. So this is a little bit of kind of just pitching for how we go about doing things. I would recommend to not get too crazy with, your ideas and types of things around a specific project, because what you want to do is create some kind of general design lingo that you can reuse on project after project that you're proposing, instead of going in here and custom writing a design brief for each of your potential clients. And you'll also want to make sure that you're not giving away a ton of ideas in your website proposal. The purpose of this is not to provide your customer a framework to go get this done by somebody else and have them execute your ideas. So I like to include kind of generic text here that can be reused over and over again. And again, we get into deliverables, custom mood board concepts. So this is a great opportunity to, instead of just showing them and saying, hey, you get 2 custom mood board concepts, put the brakes on and pull up, a sample of what a mood board is. Show them what it looks like to have an idea board or a mood board and how you use that in the design process. One thing I always like to do is show them examples of actual mood boards I used for other clients, and then show that prospective customer some actual design comps I use for other clients, and then show them a final design. So in the sales process, I show my prospective customer what a potential design process looks like and actually give them a working example of that. So this is a place where the deliverable text it's very plain. It's a bulleted list of items. It says 2 mood boards, 1 custom design, 2 rounds of revisions. So this is a very simple part of your proposal, but you can make it engaging by pulling up live examples and walking your prospective customer through that, because then they're going to go, oh, okay, I understand how the design process works. This isn't just something that, that has no look or feel to me. There's no emotion to it. Once you show them an example, then they actually see that, you come up with an idea and then you work with them to refine it, to make that idea better. And they see that transition into a final product. It's a very important visual. And it's probably one of my favorite parts of the proposal presentations, when we actually look at some examples of what some of this stuff is. And then we get specific around, just some web stuff. Like, hey, look, your site's going to be based on this idea of templates. There'll be a home page, an inside page, and then some standard elements and some form elements. So each page is not going to be a complete custom design. Most of the web is designed with a couple of key templates for a website, and those templates drive all of the content. You just have a blog template, for example, and no matter how many blog posts you create, the blog template matches that. Now, cross-browser testing, this is important. This is another place where you can say, hey, look, we make sure all of our sites are cross-browser tested. Have you ever been to a website before where it doesn't quite look right, the buttons seem a little bit off, or maybe there's something that just is totally off the page or doesn't look quite right? A lot of that has to do with the fact that everybody uses a different browser. And you might use Internet Explorer, somebody else might use Firefox, a lot of web geeks love Chrome, there's Safari. It just depends on who the person is and what their personal preference is. So one of the things we do is we make sure that we cross-browser test all websites that we make, and here are the versions that we cross-browser test for. So you're giving the client a guarantee that you're making the site up to a certain quality. For the customer, cross-browser testing is probably the only important thing they need to understand. I wouldn't get too much into things like semantic code or, that you're going to write to W3 standards and that kind of stuff, because what's most important to the prospective customer is that you write your sites to where it looks the same in all different browsers. And of course, this also is becoming an increasingly large problem when you start thinking about all the different devices that a website could potentially be viewed on. Which brings us to mobile design. So I always make sure, even though we're designing, this could be exchanged out to be a responsive or a mobile design, but in general, even if you're designing something to be responsive, it's important to allocate time to create the different views. Because you don't want to get to a homepage where when you knock it down on a responsive tablet or a mobile phone, where key elements of the page are not designed in a way that highlight what's important to the business. Like you wouldn't have want to have the phone number that's at the top of the page in the desktop view all of a sudden to be at the very, 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 very bottom of the footer because you didn't allocate time to do mobile design or mobile testing. So whether you're doing responsive or separate layouts, I would call mobile out as a separate call to action in your proposal. Build value for it and make it something that you're going to actually make some money on. And again, the mobile section here has those limits around one mobile concept, 2 rounds of revisions, 1 tablet concept, 2 rounds of revisions. Now, of course, as technologies change, this proposal obviously needs to evolve with you. So if you need to change some of the deliverables and the items here to update it to make it more in line with the responsive frameworks that you use, then definitely do that. But I would still argue to present mobile design as its own thing. The next section is website. So this is really the meat in the meat and potatoes section. This is where you're going to give some overview of actually what you're going to produce, what kind of custom functionality that you're going to create. But up until now, you have all the content and you have all the design. So when it comes time to actually build the site, then it's kind of, we've organized our proposal relatively similar to how we would actually organize our project. So one of the first things I like to call out is that we're going to create in their website with about 30 pages. So the page count is something that is very important if you're talking about the overall size of a project. I've looked at a lot of different ways to change my proposal and to create a website size multiplier, and pages is usually a good idea of how big or how long a project's going to take you. If a website has 150 or 300 pages or 1,000 pages, those are projects in an order of magnitude different than a website that has 30 pages. So, general content will be created and provided by you outside of the content that we've already outlined in our project that we're going to be producing for you. So if your customer all of a sudden wants, a page that we haven't produced for them and it's not part of our initial content inventory, then they can create that page and we'll simply load that into the system for them as long as it's in this 30-page limit. We also tell them that content can be any type of content, PDF, PowerPoint doc, downloadable file, embedded videos. Content really doesn't matter to us. It's really more about how much is there versus what kind of content it is. And then basically saying that we're going to create some dynamic menus that you'll be able to control and have some dynamic site navigation. Now, custom modules is really where you get into specific functionality. So if it's not a standard issue page of content, if it's got some kind of dynamic functionality or database or widget that we've bought or plugin that we've installed, we need to make sure that we call that out here. Because what you don't want to end up doing is installing a bunch of additional plugins that weren't in your scope of work, and it just becomes, scope creep mayhem. So you want to call out all of your specific functions. Even if these are standard issue features to you, you want to make sure that you've itemized them to say, look, yes, we are going to create a blog and a news section. And here's the general gist of what your blog is going to have and what it's going to do. The more specific you can be on these individual modules, the better. Obviously, you want to keep your proposal to some minimum length, but you also want to be very specific. If the customer has asked you to develop some custom functionality, You want to make sure that you don't end up becoming, on the hook to be their ongoing software developer just because you put in your website proposal that you were going to make them some widget. So, these are items where, I call it a homepage hero, and this is like a homepage slider, and I say that we're going to have specific assets like title, subtitle, short description, link, and video. So I try to be specific but concise at the same time. I try to think about, what are some things that might throw me a curveball later on? A good example is this locations widget. So we've basically said, kind of given an overall quick brief of what this widget's going to be. Now, if you're, let's say, using a third-party widget, this would be a good place to link to supporting documentation, but just to verbally go over it with your customer of exactly what you're going to be creating and why, to make sure it's in line with what they want, and make sure you catch any potential scope creep or expanded scope requirements prior to actually going in and building a project and being on the hook in a contract for that for your customer. And of course, if you have additional modules, this is the place to add them. One thing I will note, I mentioned e-commerce in here as a module. If a website is a full-blown e-commerce site, I probably would add an additional section, something similar to this website section, called e-commerce. Or, if there was some other really robust functionality that really needed its own scope item, then you probably are going to want to pull that out and maybe make it its own item. But for the most part, you can probably do basic e-commerce and some, if they were selling like some t-shirts on their website, then you'd probably be able to list and itemize out what that scope item would be. Now, the deliverables here are fairly simple. You're saying, look, I'm going to deliver you a fully functional website. There's not going to be any stone unturned. I'm not putting you on the hook for loading your own content or loading your own products. We're going to make sure that we're building you a thorough website so when we're done with this project, we're going to hit the go button and your website's going to be live. And there's not going to be something that's left hanging unless you bring something up that's out of scope. If you bring something up that's out of scope and it's not really outlined in this scope of work, then of course that's going to affect the budget and it's going to potentially affect the timeline. But the objective of this website proposal is to deliver you a fully functional website project. We also install Google Analytics to make sure that you've got some data tracking there, as well as Webmaster Tools. Obviously, if you use other Webmaster or analytic data tools, then feel free to swap that out and include that here. But this is a great opportunity to show your prospective customer what Google Analytics is if they don't already know what it is. So these are things that are becoming kind of standard knowledge. But if it's something that, your customer goes, I've never seen Google Analytics, and you're sitting here giving them a walkthrough of the proposal, that's an excellent time to open up Google Analytics and give them a little bit of a walkthrough. Sales is about educating people. It's about teaching them about what you're going to be doing for them and using that education to help build value for them to pay you money to do this stuff. Just because you're going to show somebody exactly what Google Analytics is and what it doesn't mean that you're going to give them any incentive whatsoever to do it themselves. So make sure at each of these opportunities, if you get questions or if you think it's a good time to show an example, take that opportunity and show your prospective customer. Give them the education they need. The next piece is email marketing. If there's any business out there that's not currently using email marketing, they need to use email marketing, and their email template should match their website template, and you should make sure that they basically have some basic lists set up. So we include email marketing in all of our projects because we want to make sure that their new website and their email has a consistent look and feel, and we want to make sure that as we send emails out and drive people to the website, that there's an experience that's the same for both of those different properties. So, your customer might already be using something like Constant Contact or iContact or MailChimp or whatever, and that's okay. What you'll want to make sure that they have is they want to have the list set up and their newsletter template set up in a way that is concise with their website. So help them out here if they definitely need it. The next section is social media. So as we start leaving kind of the general website project, we're going to be thinking about how their website connects with all of the other online business ecosystem elements out there. So one of the things we want to do is make sure that their website has a solid social media integration without it being overkill, obviously. So we'll want to make sure that they have Facebook commenting on site if they feel like that. They want to have social media links, social sharing, like buttons, be able to have a Twitter feed area, maybe even show specific hashtag feeds, being able to add Facebook tabs to their Facebook page and maybe creating an opt-in for their individual email list directly in Facebook, being able to make Facebook and Twitter have tie-ins so that when you post to Facebook, it shoots it out to Twitter. These are just basic kind of what I would consider social media setup. If the customer is not yet on social media and has an interest, then this part of the project is you going in and setting up all of these properties and making sure that, their Facebook page has a good icon and cover image, that their Google Plus page has the right cover image, that Twitter page has a good cover image. So making sure that all of their social media properties are set up as part of your website project. Because you don't want your business owner to launch this really great website and then people end up searching for them on Facebook and they end up finding this kind of decrepit and old social media setup page. So this is really easy stuff. Like, we know that we can go through and anybody can create these accounts, but by including this in your online business proposal, it's something that's going to help your customer kind of take some of the stress off their life. The next section is completion. So completion is about pulling all of the little wires and the little buttons together and making the site live. Now, completion is a very short paragraph, but it's actually usually pretty complex when it comes to DNS, making sure you have 301 redirects from their old site to their new site, making sure that email accounts are set up correctly and that you're not going to lose the website when you do the DNS point, or you're not going to lose their email accounts when you switch over the domain name servers. So there's all those kinds of things that you'll want to kind of mention to your customer that, look, we make sure that everything is good to go when we go live. And then after we go live, we're going to give you a warranty period. Now, when I first started out building websites, this is something that I did not explicitly state. We actually, in one of our proposals, said, we'll support your issues or your bugs for as long as they happen, right? We'll support this website indefinitely. And nobody does that in real life. When you buy a car, there's a specific warranty. When you buy anything, there's some kind of specific warranty. Now, because websites can be customized and anybody can go in there and mess around with it, we put a pretty strict warranty on our projects, 30 days after launch. If we have not done anything in this scope of agreement and we get it caught in the first 30 days, no questions asked, we're going to change it, we're going to fix it, we're going to do whatever it takes after launch. And one of the things I also like about the warranty is it pushes people to go live, because it makes them, a lot of times when you get people that don't want to go live and they don't want to pay you your final fee, it's because they're worried that they're going to go live and they're going to have some kind of issue with the project after it's live and you're going to disappear. So the warranty gives us kind of this buffer, because a lot of times what happens is when you launch a project, all of a sudden all these eyeballs get on it and people start wanting some feedback and they want to change some things and they're not really happy with this or that. So the 30-day warranty gives them a fixed period of time that once the site's live, even if you've been paid, no questions asked, we're going to go back and make the changes and updates that you need as necessary. So I almost look at it as kind of like you're not going to charge your customer for support for that period of time. Now, after those 30 days, you're going to go into new business territory. So this is a place where you want to explain to your prospective customer about getting into new business territory, that you're moving from, we just did a website project, there's a scope of work, and once we're done with that and the website's live, as long as we finish everything in the scope of work, after that 30 days, anything you request is new project stuff. You want the logo changed or tweaked, you want the navigation changed or tweaked, whatever it is, it's going to go into a new project. Is that cool? And the customers are always like, oh yeah, that's great. We love having a 30-day warranty. This is awesome, right? They just want to see that you're covering all the angles. Now, you'll notice that this proposal for me, like this is like my 40th version of proposal. And so what ended up happening was I developed this proposal over time because I'd go out on pitch deals and a customer would ask me a question. And I would just add that into my proposal and I'd tweak it and I'd see how it sounds and see how people react to it until I basically came to this version of the proposal. So, this is something that I pitched over and over again. And when people would ask me questions or they, maybe I didn't cover something, then I'd go back to my proposal and think about how I would incorporate that into my deal. Every project has to include training. So if you're using any kind of CMS system, if you're using any kind of email or analytics system, once you get that all live, you need to include a set amount of training. So I like to say, look, we're going to do 3 one-hour system webinars. We're going to record the training. We're going to provide you videos of that training. So this is an area where, again, we're going to charge for this training. It's going to be included in the scope of work. It's going to be something the customer understands where I'm coming from, but it's going to be included in every project. There's never going to be a time where a customer says, I want to forego the training, right? So you want to make sure you build value for your training, and you'll want to make sure that you include a called out item for each of the custom modules that you have in your project. So anything that needs to be trained on, make sure it's a part of this bulleted list. And I would even urge you to maybe add an additional training session for every one or two different items that you are adding to this individual section. I typically don't recommend doing one training session with a customer, and I also typically don't recommend obviously doing these 3 hours consecutively. So one thing that you'll want to do is you want to go live, get your final payment, have your 30-day warranty, maybe do one pre-live training and then one directly post-live training once the website's live, and then schedule your final training for maybe a month or 45 days out from there, because then your customer is going to go, okay, well, I'm going to get some, it's going to be kind of a drip instead of an all-at-once thing, because they're going to get in, use the website, want to do some additional functions and that kind of stuff. So you'll want to spread these out as well.